Exemplar Humanae Vitae, a Specimen of Human Life, by Uriel da Costa. I was born in Portugal, in a city of the same name, but commonly called Oporto. My parents were of the nobility, and originally descended from those Jews who were forced to embrace the Christian religion in that kingdom. My father was a true Christian, and a man of strict honor and integrity. I had a genteel education at home, servants always to command, and a managed Spanish jennet to perfect myself in the exercise of the great horse, in which my father was completely skilled. I tried to follow his steps to the utmost. When I grew up, and was as well accomplished in the liberal arts as young gentlemen generally are, I applied myself to the study of the law. As to my character and disposition, I was naturally very pious and compassionate. I could not hear the story of any person's misfortunes without melting into tears. I had such an innate sense of modesty that I dreaded nothing so much as suffering disgrace. Yet I had no cowardice in my temper, and was not free from resentment when a just occasion offered. For that reason, I always hated that haughty and insolent race of men who despise and trample upon others. Therefore, I took all opportunities to defend the oppressed and make their cause my own. By religion, my life has been made a scene of incredible sufferings. I was educated, according to the custom of that country, in the popish Roman Catholic religion. When I was still a young man, the dread of eternal damnation made me desire to keep all its doctrines with the utmost exactness. I spent my leisure time reading the Gospel and other spiritual books, going through breviaries of the confessors. The more time I spent on them, the greater difficulties rose up before me. Little by little, these threw me into such inextricable perplexities, doubts, and difficulties that I was overwhelmed with grief and melancholy. It seemed impossible, by confessing my sins after the custom of the Roman Church, to obtain a full absolution and truly fulfill everything that was required. This made me despair of salvation, since salvation was supposed to be obtained only by those exact rules. But it was very hard to shake off at once a religion I had been brought up in from infancy, one that had taken deep root through long habit. So when I was about 20 years old, I began to ask myself whether the things told about another life might be forgeries, and whether believing them was consistent with reason, because my reason kept suggesting things directly opposite. I continued under this doubt for some time. At last, I became fully persuaded that salvation was not to be obtained in the way I had been following. During this period, I was studying law. When I was 25, an opportunity came that gave me an ecclesiastical benefice, the position of treasurer in the collegiate church. I could not find the satisfaction I wanted in the Roman Catholic Church, yet I still desired to attach myself to some religion. Knowing there was a great dispute between Christians and Jews, I read the books of Moses and the prophets. In them I found some things that contradicted the doctrines of the New Testament, and it seemed easier to believe things revealed by God himself. Besides, the Old Testament was accepted by both Jews and Christians, whereas the New Testament was believed only by Christians. This led me to become a convert to the law of Moses. Since Moses declared he was only delivering what God himself had revealed, and said he was called, or rather forced, to accept that office, I thought, being ignorant, that it was my duty to make the law the rule of my life. Having made this decision, and seeing it was unsafe to openly practice this religion in Portugal, I began to think of leaving my native country. To do that, I resigned my church position in favor of another person, not influenced by its profit or honor, the two things that usually move people of our nation. I also left a handsome house my father had built in the best part of the city. When that was done, my mother, my brothers, and I embarked on a ship, at great risk, because people descended from Jews were not allowed to leave the kingdom without the king's special license. I must tell the reader that out of natural affection, I had shared with my family my conviction that our religion was false, even though such talk could have been fatal to me in that country. It was very dangerous there to speak freely on this subject, even to one's closest friends. When we arrived in Amsterdam, where Jews could practice their religion freely according to the law, we immediately fulfilled the command of circumcision. I had not been there many days when I noticed that the customs and rules of the modern Jews were very different from those commanded by Moses. If the law was to be strictly observed exactly as written, it was clearly wrong for Jewish teachers to add inventions of a completely opposite nature. This led me to oppose them openly. I even thought I was doing God a service by defending the law against such additions. The modern Jewish rabbis, like their ancestors, are an obstinate and perverse group, strong defenders of the sect of the Pharisees and their traditions, often for the sake of gain and out of vain love for the best seats in the synagogue and being greeted with respect in the marketplace. Men like this could not bear that I differed from them, even in the smallest points. They insisted I follow their ways exactly in everything, or else they threatened to ban me from the synagogue and pronounce the full greater excommunication on me. But I had just left my native country and given up many advantages for the sake of liberty of conscience. It would have been unworthy to be frightened and forced to submit to men who had no right to such power. Besides, I thought it both sinful and unmanly to be a slave in matters of conscience. So I resolved to suffer the worst they could do, rather than give in. They excommunicated me completely. Even my own brothers, who once looked to me as their teacher in spiritual things, dared not speak to me when they passed me in the street, for fear of the rabbis. This situation led me to write a treatise defending myself and proving from the law of Moses that the traditions of the Pharisees were empty, invalid, and contrary to the law. While writing this work, I came to agree with those who say the rewards and punishments in the Old Testament apply only to this life, and that the law shows little concern for a future state or the immortality of the soul. This was based on the fact that the law of Moses is completely silent about a future state and immortality, and only promises rewards and punishments in this present life. My opponents were delighted. They thought they could now win the Christians to their side, because Christians believe the gospel teaches eternal rewards and punishments, and the immortality of the soul. To make me hateful to the Christians and silence me completely, before my book was printed, they got a certain doctor to publish a treatise called On the Immortality of the Soul, in which he attacked me bitterly as a follower of Epicurus, who denied the immortality of the soul, and therefore almost denied God himself. At that time, I actually had a low opinion of Epicurus, based on unfair reports from others. Without reading him myself, I freely called him absurd and mad. Later, after hearing fair accounts from lovers of truth, I changed my mind and was sorry for the injustice I had done such a great man. Now I am far from being able to judge his works, because I have never read them. Next, they set children on me in the streets. The children insulted me in groups, shouting, "There goes a heretic! There goes an apostate!" At other times, crowds gathered in front of my house, throwing stones at the windows and doing everything they could to disturb me, so I could not live in peace, even in my own home. After the doctor's book came out, I wrote an answer, defending myself as strongly as I could against the idea of the soul's immortality, and again pointed out how the Pharisees had departed from the law of Moses. As soon as my reply was printed, the Jewish leaders laid a complaint against me before the city magistrates, saying I had published a book denying the immortality of the soul in order to destroy both the Jewish and the Christian religion. I was arrested and put in prison. After 8 or 10 days, I was released on bail, but I was fined 300 florins, and all copies of my books were confiscated. Some time later, because age and experience often change a man's judgment, I began to ask myself whether the law of Moses really should be considered the law of God. Many arguments convinced me it was not. Finally, I became certain that it was nothing but a human invention, like many others, that Moses never wrote it, and that it contained things contrary to the law of nature. God, who is the author of the law of nature, could not contradict himself by giving men a law that went against it. Having reached this conclusion, I began to think, oh, how I wish I never had. What good does it do me to spend my days in this sad, separated state, a stranger in this country with no friends and not even knowing the language? Would it not be better to return to the Jewish community and do in Rome as the Romans do? These thoughts won. I went back, made a formal recantation, and signed whatever articles they required, after 15 years of separation. A cousin of mine had helped bring about this reconciliation. Only a few days later, my own nephew, a boy I kept in my house, accused me of not keeping the Jewish rules about food and other ceremonies. This started new and cruel attacks against me. My cousin, who had been the mediator, felt his honor was stained. He was a proud, angry, bold man. He became my deadly enemy, turned all my brothers against me, and did everything possible to ruin my reputation, my fortune, and even my life. He stopped a marriage I was about to make. I had recently lost my wife. He caused one brother to keep money and goods that belonged to me, and ended all business dealings between us, which hurt me terribly. Besides this family war, the rabbis and the people persecuted me again with fresh hatred and insults that filled me with horror. Then a new incident happened. 2 men, one Spaniard, one Italian, both Christians with no Jewish blood, came from London to Amsterdam. They told me they were poor and asked whether they should become Jews. I strongly advised them not to, warning them they did not know how heavy the yoke was, and begged them never to mention our conversation to the Jews. They promised faithfully. But these treacherous men, hoping for money, went straight to the Pharisees and told everything. The synagogue rulers met. The rabbis exploded with rage, and the crowd shouted, "Crucify him!" I was summoned before their council. My charges were read as solemnly as if I were on trial for my life. They decided that if I was truly a Jew, I must submit to their sentence. Otherwise, I would be excommunicated again. They claimed the power to judge and punish, yet when anyone asked them for protection against wrong, they said they had no civil authority. Then they read my sentence from a little book. I must enter the synagogue wearing mourning clothes, holding a black wax candle, and publicly read a confession they had written, describing my crimes in the blackest terms. Then I must be publicly whipped with a leather scourge. After that, I must lie at the synagogue door so everyone could step over me, and I must fast on certain days. When I heard this, I burned with anger, but I controlled myself and simply said I could not submit to such a severe punishment. They consulted again and pronounced a second excommunication. Not satisfied with that, many spat on me in the street and taught their children to do the same. The only reason they did not stone me was lack of power. This persecution lasted 7 full years. If I told everything I suffered, it would sound unbelievable. 2 groups hunted me, the whole Jewish community and my own relatives seeking revenge. If I was sick, no one helped me. If I had any misfortune, they rejoiced. They refused any Jewish person I suggested as a fair judge between us. Going to the city courts was slow and costly. They often urged me to submit, saying sweetly, "We are your fathers. Trust us. Just say you will do whatever we command, and all will be easy." But that was the very point. I knew how shameful it was to surrender completely and trust their mercy. Finally, after much struggle, I decided to try their honor. I thought, if they treat me badly, the whole world will see their true cruel character. So I said, "Here I am. I put myself in your hands. Do whatever you wish." Now listen carefully, every fair and humane person, and judge what sentence a group of private men under a foreign government passed on an innocent person. I went into the synagogue packed with men, women, and children who came out of curiosity. At the set time, I stood on the platform in the middle and read aloud the confession they had prepared, that I deserved to die 1,000 deaths for breaking the Sabbath, breaking vows, and, worst of all, discouraging others from becoming Jews. I said I submitted to whatever punishment they chose and promised never to offend again. When I finished, I stepped down. The chief rabbi whispered for me to go to a certain corner. There the doorkeeper told me to strip. I stripped naked to the waist, tied a cloth around my head, took off my shoes, raised my arms, and clasped a pillar. The doorkeeper tied my hands to it. Then the officer came with a scourge of leather thongs and gave me 39 lashes. Jewish law says never more than 40. These very religious men are careful not to do too much. While I was whipped, they sang a psalm. When it was over, I sat on the floor. The rabbi came, spoke the words of absolution, and suddenly the gates of heaven, that had been locked against me, were flung wide open. What ridiculous ideas men have. I put on my clothes and went to the synagogue door. There I lay face down. The doorkeeper held my head up while every person, old and young, men and women, stepped with one foot on my legs as they passed over me, making foolish monkey-like gestures. When all had passed, I stood up, was washed by an attendant, and went home. Let no one say they did not honor me. They whipped me, yes, but then they stroked my head and wept over me. Shameless people. Imagine an old man of good family, naturally very modest, stripped half naked, before a huge crowd of men, women, and children, whipped by order of his judges, men who deserved to be called slaves themselves. Imagine him forced to lie at the feet of his worst enemies while they trample him after years of insults. And worst of all, his own brothers, raised in the same house, joining the persecutors, forgetting all natural love and the many kindnesses I had shown them, repaying tenderness with shame and injury. They defended themselves by saying they only made an example of me, to stop others from rebelling against their rules and writing against their teachers. Liars. With far better reason, I could have made a public example of them, to stop them from abusing honest lovers of truth, people who hate fraud and love all mankind equally, while they treat everyone else like animals or dirt, proudly calling themselves God's only favorites, when they have nothing to boast of, except living like hated vagabonds because of their absurd customs. If they claim greater honesty than others, it is false. Many others far surpass them in virtue. If I had had the power, I could justly have punished this contemptible group for the injuries that made life itself a burden to me. Who with any regard for honour can bear to live in constant shame? As an ancient writer said, every man must either live with honour or die bravely. My cause is as much better than theirs as truth is better than lies. They defend fraud so they can make slaves and prey of men. I fight nobly for truth and for the natural rights of all mankind, rights that let us live with the dignity of rational beings, free from useless superstitions and ceremonies. I admit it would have been wiser to stay silent from the beginning and accept things as they were. That is the safe, politic way for those who want to avoid the insults of the crowd and the oppression of tyrants. Everyone who cares only for self-interest tries to suppress truth and trample justice. But once I had been deceived into false religion and had entered the fight, I thought it more honourable to die bravely than to live with the shame of cowardly surrender. They often said, "You are only one against so many. You must submit." Yes, it is safer for one man to yield to numbers than to be crushed. But safety does not make it right to surrender the field to robbers. It is glorious to stand against the proud invader, so that success does not encourage further tyranny. It is right to be gentle with the gentle, but to act like a lamb against lions is foolish. If dying for one's country is glorious, and country is part of ourselves, is it not equally glorious to die for honour and reputation, which belong even more personally to us? Without honour, we cannot live as men, unless you think wallowing in greed makes a man. They boast of their numbers and sneer, "What can one man do against so many?" I admit, I am overpowered by your multitude, and it fills me with burning anger. I lack the power for revenge, that is all I can say. To ruin my name among the common people, they often said, "This man is neither Jew, Christian, nor Muslim. He has no religion at all." Be careful, blind Pharisees. Your malice betrays you. If I were a Christian, you would call me an idolater and say I will be condemned with Jesus of Nazareth. If I were a Muslim, you would curse me with even worse names. The only way to escape your slander is to fall at your feet and accept your carnal rules. You yourselves say there is one more way. You teach that if all nations except the Jews keep the 7 commandments given to Noah, that is enough for salvation. By your own words, then, there's another true religion open even to a descendant of Jews, the simple law of nature, followed by all uncircumcised people. Let me follow that, or I will do it anyway without your permission. You blind Pharisees ignore the eternal law of nature that was from the beginning and will be to the end. You only praise later laws and condemn everyone except your own. Right reason, the true measure of the law of nature, will judge you whether you like it or not. That law of nature binds all men with mutual love. It has nothing to do with the divisions that cause hatred. It teaches us how to live well, what is right and wrong, decent and indecent. Everything good in the law of Moses or any other system is already perfectly contained in the law of nature. If we stray even a little from it, quarrels begin. If we stray far, the result is confusion and disaster. Honoring parents, not stealing life, property, or reputation. All these are taught first by nature and reason. We naturally love our children, and they love us. Brothers love brothers. Friends love friends. We hate being robbed or deceived, so we must not rob or deceive others. Leave the choice of foods to doctors. As for ceremonies, sacrifices, tithes, and all the tricks invented to let the lazy live off the work of others, that is the cause of our misery. We are deceived by cunning men. True Christians deserve praise for throwing out most of these burdens and keeping only what helps moral life. We do not live well by endless ceremonies, but by living as rational creatures. Some say the law of Moses or the gospel teaches something higher than nature. For example, love your enemies. But if a command is impossible to obey, it only causes unhappiness. Nature already teaches us to be kind and compassionate even to enemies when possible, and that is perfect enough. Any law, no matter who claims to have written it, that orders a father to kill his son, a brother his brother, or a friend his friend for religion's sake, destroys the natural bonds of humanity and makes men monsters. False religion has filled the world with fear, despair, self-torture, and needless misery. I speak from bitter experience. I am one who was cruelly deceived. People say, if men do not fear eternal punishment, nothing will stop them from evil. That is your own invention, probably for your profit. The same way nurses scare children with ghosts to make them obey. Children believe it, but when they grow up they laugh. Your stories are fit only for children and fools. You yourselves teach that evil must not be done, even so that good may come. Yet you invent terrifying lies that harm people's most important interests. If human nature really is so corrupt, and your own cruelty proves it can be, then find a real cure instead of childish scare stories. If the disease is incurable, stop pretending you can heal it. Stop promising salvation you cannot give. Simply make fair civil laws, reward the good, punish the bad, and protect the weak from the strong. If men lived by reason and the law of nature, they would love and help one another. No one would hurt his neighbor, because that is against human nature itself. Many evils come from laws that contradict nature, and from hypocrites who use pretended holiness to rob the simple, like thieves who attack in the dark while you sleep. Yet these same men boast, I am a Jew, or I am a Christian, trust me completely. A plain, honest man who claims nothing but to be human is far better. With him, you can at least be on guard. One thing amazes me, how the Jewish community in a Christian city like Amsterdam is allowed to have judicial power and whip people. If Jesus of Nazareth came preaching today, and the Pharisees wanted to whip him again for opposing their traditions, they could do it freely, and no one would stop them. In a free city that claims to protect liberty, this should not be allowed where a man has no lawyer or judge to defend him. He must defend himself the best he can. Here is the true story of my life, the part I played on this vain stage of the world during a most troubled and changing existence. Judge fairly and honestly what I have written. If anything moves you to pity, remember we all share the same human misery. So you know who wrote this. In Portugal, when I was a Christian, my name was Uriel da Costa. When I came to the Jews, something I now wish I had never done, my name was changed to Uriel. Thank you for listening to my autobiography. If you want more of me, you can purchase my various writings in book format on Amazon. You can even find antique collectible copies from Abe Books. If you want to understand why I didn't kill myself, you can head over to Amazon and order a copy of Kindred Wendy Coriel's Uriel da Costa Didn't Kill Himself, a freethink examination of morals and common sense.